Fires are lighting up the skies over Moscow and St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, occupied Crimea is running dry, fuel is scarce, store shelves are emptying, and the Kremlin is scrambling to explain why. For a war that Russia was supposed to be steadily winning, 2026 has turned into something nobody in Moscow expected. Stick around, because in this video we're breaking down exactly how Ukraine pulled this off, and whether it's enough to change the course of the entire war. If you're new here, welcome to Crimson Archive. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Let's start on the ground. Russia's territorial gains have slowed to a crawl this year. Data from the Finnish monitoring group Blackbird shows Russian forces captured only around 164 square kilometers between February and May of 2026, a steep drop from over 1,150 square kilometers in the same stretch of 2025. Part of the reason is that Ukraine has clawed back an edge in drone warfare, while disruptions to Starlink connectivity have also worked against Russian coordination. The result is a Ukrainian army that isn't just holding the line, it's pushing back in places. In June, Ukrainian units advanced near Mali-Sherbaki and Orikhiv on the Zaporizhzhia front, and kept grinding forward around Novopavlivka and Oleksandrad in Donetsk. The Lyman direction, long a Russian target, has essentially stalled out completely, with Ukraine reclaiming territory near Novoselivka and Yampil. That matters because if Russia ever broke through there, Sloviansk, the northern anchor of Ukraine's Donbass defensive line, would be exposed. Russia has openly said finishing off Donbass is its top military priority, so every meter here counts. It's not all good news for Kiev, though. Further south, the city of Kostiantynivka is in real danger. Russian forces spent months grinding along the H20 and T0504 roads before breaking into the city's outskirts in May, and in June 2 separate Russian tactical groups pushed deeper, one through Novodmitrivka into the northeast of the city, another from the east. If Kostiantynivka falls, the road opens toward Druzhkivka, and Russia would have its first major foothold inside the fortress belt. Kupiansk is also back in play, a town Ukraine already recaptured once after Russia prematurely claimed victory there, only for Russian troops to infiltrate it again this June. But here's the twist. The ground war might not be where this conflict is actually being decided anymore. The real story is in the skies, and it's a story of range, precision, and Russia's crumbling logistics. Ukraine's medium-range drone fleet now outnumbers and outranges Russia's equivalent, and it's being used with brutal efficiency against supply depots, staging areas, and command posts. A French open-source analyst, Clement Mollin, has geolocated footage confirming strikes on at least 500 Russian vehicles between May 1st and June 18th alone. Much of that damage has landed on the M14 highway, the critical road link running through Mariupol and Melitopol into Crimea. Bridges connecting the peninsula to the mainland have been hit repeatedly in June, with at least 21 confirmed strikes on Crimean infrastructure between June the 7th and 24th. The rail line from Russia no longer even reaches the peninsula, it now terminates at Kerch. Layer on top of that regular strikes against Russian air defense batteries in Crimea, and you get a peninsula that is, quite simply, being cut off. The civilian fallout has been dramatic. Crimea's occupation government first rationed gasoline, then on June 21st banned fuel sales to civilians and businesses entirely, every drop now reserved for the military. Think about what that actually means. No fuel for cars, no fuel to move goods, empty shelves, daily life grinding almost to a halt. Reports suggest Russian units have already pulled out of the Kinburn spit because they simply couldn't keep them supplied. If this keeps up, some analysts believe it could trigger a wave of people leaving Crimea altogether, which would be a devastating political blow for Putin back home. And it's not just Crimea, the same supply squeeze is starting to show up in occupied Kherson too. So does this open the door to a major Ukrainian counteroffensive aimed at retaking Crimea? Probably not yet. Ukraine tried something similar in 2023, pushing towards Zaporizhzhia and attempting a foothold across the Dnipro, and both efforts stalled out. Today's battlefield is even more saturated with drones, which makes any large mechanized push extremely risky. And crucially, Russian troops on the Zaporizhzhia front itself haven't shown the same supply problems yet, meaning Ukraine would have to fight through well-supplied lines before ever reaching the weaker ones in Crimea. So this looks less like the setup for a breakthrough and more like a slow strangulation. Pressure Ukraine can use as leverage rather than a springboard for a quick offensive. And that pressure campaign isn't stopping at Crimea's edges. Ukraine's long-range strikes are now reaching deep into Russia itself, hitting targets Putin probably assumed were untouchable. In early June, Ukrainian drones struck the Kronstadt naval base and an oil terminal near St. Petersburg, one of these attacks landing during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, with Putin himself in the city. Then came the strikes on Moscow's own oil refinery in mid-June, setting off fires and black smoke that lingered over the capital for days. That refinery reportedly supplied around 70% of fuel for Moscow city and the wider region, and it may stay offline into 2027. Ukraine has even reached targets over 2,000 kilometers away, striking a refinery in Lyman, deep in Siberia. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian oil infrastructure have been accelerating, roughly 18 in April, 33 in May, and 28 more through late June. The consequences are showing up at the pump. Fuel rationing has now reportedly spread even to Moscow and St. Petersburg, forcing Russia to start importing gasoline from Belarus and at least one unnamed Asian supplier. All of this is starting to crack public confidence inside Russia. A sitting Russian MP publicly complained in June that the Kremlin has no real answer to these strikes. Leaked details from focus groups run by Russia's ruling party ahead of September's elections reportedly showed well over half of participants expressing exhaustion with the war, with some telling researchers plainly, either escalate and win, or find a way to end it. Recruitment numbers tell a similar story. Roughly 71,000 men joined the army in the first quarter of 2026, down from about 90,000 in the same period last year. Russia isn't just absorbing these hits, of course. Its own long-range strikes remain devastating. Early June saw a combined assault of dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones against Kiev, Dnipro, Odessa, and Kharkiv that killed 22 civilians, and a follow-up strike in mid-June badly damaged the historic Kiev-Pechursk Lavra monastery. Russian missile and drone production keeps climbing too, with estimates suggesting dozens of Kh-101 and Iskander missiles rolling out every month, on top of large-scale drone manufacturing. A reminder that Russia's ability to hurt Ukraine, especially through the coming winter, hasn't gone away. On the diplomatic side, Ukraine has been playing hardball. Zelensky reportedly warned Belarusian leader Lukashenko in June to remove equipment helping Russia guide its long-range strikes, and remarkably, Lukashenko appears to have complied rather than risk becoming a target himself. Ukraine is also reportedly testing its own domestically built interceptors for ballistic missiles, though for now it still leans heavily on Western-supplied Patriot systems. That Western support kept flowing through June, Germany committing funds for interceptors, the UK pledging hundreds of air defense missiles and thousands of drones, the Netherlands funding both American weapons purchases and Ukraine's own drone programs, and Belgium promising F-16s. Diplomatically, though, momentum has stalled. With Washington's attention pulled toward Iran, there's been little active US involvement in ceasefire talks. Zelensky publicly invited Putin to negotiate directly in early June, warning that Russia won't take the rest of Donbass this year and that its warfighting resources will only keep shrinking. Putin turned the offer down, insisting Russia will still capture the remaining Donbass territory and repeating familiar rhetoric about the war's aims, without addressing any of the setbacks actually unfolding on the ground. Put it all together, and Russia is facing pressure on almost every front at once: burning refineries, an isolated and fuel-starved Crimea, stalling advances in Donbass, and a public mood that's visibly souring. None of this guarantees a dramatic breakthrough is coming. But it does mean Russia's position is far shakier than it looked even a year ago, and Ukraine shows no sign of easing up. Before we go, here's where things stood as of late June according to open-source tracking from the Oryx blog. Russia has confirmed losses of over 4,400 tanks, more than 10,800 other vehicles, 320 command and communications posts, over 2,300 artillery pieces, 186 aircraft, and 177 helicopters. Ukraine's confirmed losses stand at over 1,400 tanks, nearly 6,700 vehicles, 93 command posts, over 1,300 artillery systems, 117 aircraft, and 56 helicopters. Worth noting that both sides have pulled back from heavy armor use in offensives lately, as drones increasingly dominate the battlefield, which helps explain why these numbers have slowed compared to earlier years of the war. That's where things stand for now. If you want to stay on top of how this war keeps evolving, make sure you're subscribed to Crimson Archive with notifications on, and drop a like if you found this breakdown useful. It genuinely helps the channel grow. We'll see you in the next one.